I'm Mark Turner, president of the Gilroy Chamber of Commerce, and we're back with our virtual legislative summit. This is our 8th annual legislative summit, and this year we've got someone new with us. This is the Northern California Regional Director of the High-Speed Rail Authority, Boris Lipkin. Boris, thanks for being with us.
Hi, Mark, and thank you very much for inviting us to join the summit this year. We appreciate the invitation. I'm happy to talk with you today.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a great discussion. There's a lot of things swirling around with regards to the high-speed rail and what's happening with it. And Boris, I think I'll just jump right into it. I think the one thing that is on everybody's mind, the one question is, okay, is this really going to happen?
Well, I think that's a great place to start. And the simple answer to that is, it's not, is it going to happen? It's already happening. We have 119 miles of the system already under construction. That's the largest rail construction project anywhere in the country that's going on right now in our state. And as we're doing that, we're also continuing to advance the work to expand from where we are building right now in the Central Valley to achieve the full vision that the voters approved back in 2008 to get the system from San Francisco to Los Angeles and Anaheim as a first phase, and then extensions to Sacramento and San Diego as the second phase. And that work is advancing, and we've made big strides in environmental clearance, which is our next step, both in Northern California and in Southern California. And that's what will position us to advance and move construction forward to really tying our state together like it's never been before, using high-speed rail as that key rail linkage that we can provide to the citizens of California.
Sure, and I get, the question I think of then is what's the status? You sort of addressed some of that in your previous answer there, with regards to where we're at in the Bay Area and Gilroy in particular. What is the status? What would we be looking at here?
Sure, and maybe I'll start kind of big picture, and I mentioned a little bit briefly in the previous one, but right now we have 119 miles in construction. That's been well underway if we broke ground in 2015. What the governor has laid out and what our board has just approved in our 2020 business plan is extending that to 171 miles using existing resources, and that gets us to Merced and to Bakersfield. That's our next 50 miles of construction. In Northern California, we are helping electrify the Caltrain corridor between San Jose and San Francisco. But as we do that, we're also advancing the environmental clearance to connect between the Caltrain corridor and where we are building in the Central Valley. And so we issued our draft environmental document for the San Jose to Merced project section about this time, actually last year. We've received comments on that, and we're working diligently to respond to every comment that we got through that process. And we'll be bringing that to our board of directors for their approval late this year, early next year in 2022. And that's really what allows us to get going out in the real world, is once we have environmental clearance. And so what the business plan lays out is the work that's in front of us from there is continuing to advance our design work, make sure that we know what right-of-way we're going to need, how we get utilities out of the way where we need to build new rail service, and do our geotechnical investigations through Pacheco Pass. So those are some of the next things that are in front of us. And ultimately, at some point, where the conversation will go is towards the big picture funding questions around the needed resources to actually build out the entire system, which I'm sure that that's something of interest to many folks, including in South Santa Clara County and Gilroy in particular. And those are conversations that we'll continue to have with the legislature and Congress. And we're seeing a lot more conversation on the federal side than we have previously happening right now. So it's certainly an exciting time to be making sure that we're positioned, should those resources become available, to move quickly into actual construction and building out the system.
Well, you had mentioned the electrification of the rails. Is that something that will occur also in Gilroy and South County area?
Yeah, so as I mentioned through our environmental clearance process, we have to look at different alternatives, right? And so the preferred alternative that we have for this stretch is that we would continue that electrification, which right now ends in San Jose, all the way down to the Gilroy station, and upgrading that existing rail corridor, which is mostly a single, sometimes a double freight track, to having 2 electrified passenger tracks and 1 unelectrified freight track running alongside. That would allow, of course, our service to operate, to Gilroy and then from Gilroy to the Central Valley, but also would allow Caltrain to potentially expand their service as they electrify their fleet. They wouldn't be under the same constraints that they have right now, which they can only offer very minimal Caltrain service. So for both Morgan Hill, who's your neighbor slightly to the north, but also for Gilroy, certainly that would bring the South County communities closer to the rest of the Bay Area and which has stronger rail service generally.
Well, and I'm sure the next question I have for you is it's not anything that you've not heard before, and probably one of the biggest marks against this project really is from the public's perspective, and that is that the costs have far exceeded the budget. How does High Speed Rail Authority instill confidence in the public that this will not continue to be going in that direction? The costs have just been outrageous. How do you respond to that?
Sure. I mean, look, I think there's sort of two sides to that coin. One side is, is it worth doing? That's the first question on cost. And what we've seen is that an equivalent investment in airports and highways would cost close to twice as much of what our system cost is. And of course, it wouldn't achieve our other objectives, including reducing emissions, tying our economies closer together with faster travel, et cetera. But we've also talked a lot about the lessons learned from some of our construction. We frankly got out, we had a very strict federal deadline to spend the federal funds that we had received from the Recovery Act in 2009, which meant that we issued our construction contracts in the Central Valley before we had all the right-of-way in hand. And we've paid some price for doing that. Now, we would have lost the federal funds if we hadn't. So those are tough decisions that were made. But the other part that I've seen, and I've been working on the program for close to a decade now, is just the maturity of the organization that's happened in that time, where the mistakes that happened in 2013 or 14, those are sort of legacy issues that we've addressed and we've moved past, but we've adopted what we call a stage gate process to really be much more systematic in how we approach projects as we move forward. And so all of those things kind of together are our compendium of, not everything's gone how we've wanted to, but we know what we're doing at this stage, and we know how to move the things forward in a way that avoids those same pitfalls. And so absolutely, the cost is one of the things that we will have to continue to manage, and we'll have to continue to be very transparent and clear with folks about what is it going to take. But last thing I'll say, and this is tied to a little bit of the funding side of things, is we've never been fully funded. And so the one way to contain the cost issues is the sooner you build it, the less it will cost. I can guarantee you, that's one guarantee that I can make, is if we continue to wait, for a long time and to have the funding materialize, it'll only cost more. That's the one thing that's always true for these kinds of construction projects.
Sure. And I guess when you think about the private sector, when they look at those costs, you don't have the funding, you don't start the project. And I get it, this is a much larger project, and sometimes you've got to just go out there and do it and hope to raise money along the way. But the private sector doesn't count on taxpayer dollars. And so and what we're knowing now, what we're seeing now with construction materials is those costs are going up coming out of the pandemic with everything that's been going on. Those construction costs, those material costs are increasing. So we can only imagine that High Speed Rail Authority will face similar challenges in their efforts.
Yeah, and that's why what we've talked about is our kind of strategies. We build out the system, and this isn't, frankly, too different than any large infrastructure project, whether it's a highway or other rail lines, like the extension of BART to San Jose has done the same thing in its history. Is you start with building blocks that can provide benefits, and that's why we haven't just been doing a piece of construction that can't be put into service, can't be put into use. And one of our primary goals has throughout the process has been get something into service as soon as possible, because part of what we're also facing is that this is new to California and to the US. We have over 50 years of history in Japan and in Europe and other places. We have high-speed rail in Uzbekistan and Morocco at this point, but we've been a little bit behind the curve when it comes to the rest of the world on this. And so getting a operating line into service and being able to demonstrate to our citizens, this is what it is, and this is the benefits that it can provide. I think that's an important goal that we've always maintained as we've been building it out. It's making sure that anything we do can have that benefit to the traveling public, of course.
Sure, and of course we all know Californians, but Americans certainly have a love affair with their vehicles. So it'll be difficult to coax them out of their cars and into again, high-speed rail is not really, what we know is it's not a transportation system for local, you know, traveling from Gilroy to San Jose for work. That's not the, the market you're appealing to. This is for longer trips. So
Sure, and I guess what I would say is that I grew up in the Bay Area and I went to school in Southern California, and I've done the drive over 152 enough times to tell you that if there was a train that could get me there faster and easier, I would have done that, 11 times out of 10. So, those are certainly, while we certainly love to drive, I think the getting to LA in just a couple hours is a game changer for how close it could be, for that kind of trip as well.
very much so. Yeah, good point. Hey, so once the project is completed, how does the project get funded? Should ridership not be what is projected? Will this become another taxpayer subsidized transportation project?
Well, I guess let me talk about that a little bit. What we've seen internationally and with high-speed rail is that the government needs to make the initial investment to build out these systems. That's that's almost universal. But once they're in operation, they can break even because they are time competitive compared to other modes in these inner city markets. And so what our analysis has shown is once we connect at least two parts of the state together, so I think of sort of the Northern California Bay Area region, the Central Valley, and Southern California, once at least two of those are connected, that's where our travel time advantages really start to take over. And we anticipate being able, we have a private operator who's working with us, Deutsche Bahn, who's the German rail firm. And all of their analysis has shown that, that's at that point where it becomes profitable on an operating basis for the private sector to be running the service for us. And so we anticipate that that's going to be true for us, just as it's been true everywhere else in the world. There are, of course, trade-offs and benefits that you can have if you wanted to provide much lower fares. For example, maybe you would choose to provide some operating subsidies or something like that. But we're certainly not anticipating the need for that once we build out the system.
Okay, well, good. Well, let me ask you this then, as far as Gilroy is concerned, when would we expect it? I know this is an approximate, answer you'd give. I know you can't do it in exact, but when might we begin to see construction beginning in Gilroy?
Sure, and I think what I'll say is we have our next 2 or 3 years of work in front of us in terms of a little bit on environmental clearance left, and then some advancing of design. Those are the things that we can do with our available resources. After that point is when we would really be looking to get construction contracts going. And so that's probably, about 3-4 years out, but that's subject to funding availability. And so that's, I think, the soonest you would see it. But I'm not going to sit here and promise that that's when you'll see it, because it's all subject to future funding that we need to acquire for it.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. Well, the other big question for Gilroyans is, where will that high-speed rail station, where will it go?
Yeah, so we've looked at, as I mentioned, a few different alternatives. And so we've looked at, out of our 4 alternatives that we have in the San Jose to Merced project section, 3 of them use the downtown existing Gilroy station, and the one has a station on the east side of Gilroy, close to where the outlet malls are. And so the preferred alternative is the one that I mentioned, using the existing rail corridor, electrifying that, and using that existing station. We would, of course, need to expand it and upgrade it and make sure that it can accommodate our service, accommodate increased Caltrain service, as well as a connection for the service planned out from Gilroy out to the coast, to Monterey and Salinas area. So we would make sure that that would be an integrated hub, and working with, obviously the city, VTA, Caltrain, and the other partners there, to make sure that we have a successful station for not just our system, but all the different passenger rail services coming to the city. And I think you will see a very different station than you have sort of today, that has just a few trains kind of going by on a daily basis. So
it's interesting because we do have in fact, we have a discussion going on. VTA is looking at, or the county, I should say, is looking at a housing project in the park there where that station is being considered. How does that play into the plans of that station?
Yeah, we've been in touch with VTA, and they reached out to us when they got interested in this, and so we're working very closely with them to make sure that where we, for example, need to put tracks or platforms, that's not where they're planning to put a building,
Right.
and making sure all of that can line up. And we certainly want to see development around our stations, and so affordable housing is a clear need that we have in the state and in the region and the county. And so if that's what, there seems to be a lot of momentum to have that move forward. So we certainly want to make sure that that works and is integrated with the rest of the station plans and how people can get to and from the station. I mean, all of the questions that will come through the planning process. But we've been very much in touch with them about that. And I think there's a desire from everybody to make sure that this works appropriately.
One of the concerns I will say that I'm hearing from the community with regards to the development there at that station is that will remove a lot of the parking spaces that travelers would use. And so is that something then that the High Speed Rail Authority, do you come in and place parking in other locations in and around that station or around that development that would be usable by passengers?
Yeah, I mean, we've certainly done I mean, it's preliminary kind of engineering and planning around how access would work for the station. One of the things that we focused in on is if you're familiar with that specific location, on the west side, there's the existing VTA parking lot and transit loop that's there. On the other side, there's this big empty lot. And so we've thought about how we could utilize that as part of having access that's more balanced from the two sides of the stations. And some of that, of course, could go towards parking, but some of it might also be transit and other facilities that would be necessary. So all of that's in our plans, as well as some offsite parking that we've looked at. But of course, those are also decisions that tie into land use. And what we've been talking with the city of Gilroy about is continuing to look at stationary planning and sort of the general land use and as part of the potential update to the downtown specific plan that wasn't updated with the general plan last year, to make sure that we can sort all those things out, because it's not just a singular, where does high-speed rail put parking? It's where should we have parking in the entire downtown area, of course.
Right, and that's a good strategy. Of course, that my next question was going to be, what conversations have you had with the city of Gilroy with regards to this project and the station, the location, all of those issues?
Sure. I mean, we've been planning this project for a long time, so we had lots of ongoing conversations. There's sort of a little bit of two parallel paths. One is focused on the environmental process, and as we were doing that and identifying our preferred alternative, for example, the city did weigh in and provide a letter to our board of directors to consider, and they were in support of the same preferred alternative that we were recommending. So it's good to have that alignment, because that was obviously a debate that took place for a number of years, kind of in the run up to that action in 2019. And then the other focus has been on, we had started some stationary planning work back in the 2014-15 timeframe. But now that we do have a preferred alternative, we have a specific station location, it's easier to do the planning of how we integrate land use and transportation together. And so we're in active conversations with the city about restarting that effort as part of the city's overall land use planning, and being a partner in helping provide some of the funding that we have for that, as well as the engagement around making sure that the high-speed rail side of things and the land use side of things really work well together for the community. So that's an active conversation, and I'm sure you'll be seeing more of that as we continue to advance our collective work together.
And Boris, when we talk about the electrification of tracks, I begin to assume in my mind then that when we talk about how these tracks will be built, I mean, it's either going to be, it sounds like it's going to be at grade, not below grade or elevated. Is that correct?
Yeah, so for the majority of again, and then this is where our alternatives all differ. So this is the answer based on the preferred alternative. It would keep the tracks basically at the same grade where they're at now, utilize as much of that existing rail corridor, which for the most part is wide enough for the 3 tracks that would be needed. There are some places, especially in the approach to the station, where we would Still need a little bit of additional width there, but certainly it's a lot less impactful than when some of our other alternatives that propose to build a whole new rail corridor. But most of it would be we would upgrade it's basically a rebuild of the rail corridor and a modernization of it. Frankly, that I don't know when. I'm not sure exactly when it was built, but I don't think this much of investment has ever happened to it since that original construction.
Right. And when you talk about the 3 tracks, are you talking about 2 additional tracks, or so 3 total would be?
Yeah, so we would need is 3 total tracks, because you need 1 northbound passenger track, 1 southbound passenger electrified track. So that's for our service and Caltrain. And then Union Pacific is the current owner of the corridor. They would need to maintain their freight service. So we would need to make sure, and they don't like to operate under the electric wires. So we would need to make sure there's a separate freight track for their service to be maintained in the corridor.
And again, do you foresee, as far, you mentioned the width, everything looked good there. Do you see any disruption to any of our businesses along that corridor? And then additionally, what is the disruption to our downtown during construction? Would we see roads closed and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would maybe point you towards, because there's a lot of very detailed studies and engineering that's been done around this in the environmental documents. So rather than me trying to give you a rundown of all of the things that are in there, I mean, there are construction impacts. Certainly there are some places where we need additional right of way. All of those are identified in the EIR, and I would just point folks to our website to really look into those. And if there's particular folks who are interested in really digging into it with us, our team is certainly available to sit down, whether with a business owner or a property owner or somebody else in the community who really needs to understand this stuff better. I mean, I think what we've done is a lot of work to make sure that we minimize the impacts everywhere we can and mitigate the ones that are left over. But this is a big construction project, so there are going to be impacts certainly associated with it.
Sure. Have you had discussions with some of the business owners along this area in Gilroy?
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely done a variety of kind of community meetings and things like that, even during COVID in this kind of format, but pre-COVID in person, to have some of those conversations. And some of those were co-hosted with the city, or I think even with the chamber. I remember a couple of years ago, I think we did one. And we've continued to engage. We have a community working group that sort of is from representatives from different organizations in the area that meets and advises on these. And of course, we've also had sort of one-on-one discussions with specific property owners around their individual properties. And, not to generalize, but, there's very detailed issues associated with that. And some of those are tied to what we know now, and some of those will be tied to what we know once we're actually closer to construction, where we have, very, much more detailed design and construction plans to share at that stage.
Okay, very good. Well, Boris, what can you give us your website address, and then also some contact information if anybody in the public is interested in reaching out?
Sure. Our website is www.hsr.ca.gov, and then a contact person. I guess I'll give Rachel Bickert as our contact for those who might want to reach out to us and get in touch with our staff. That's rachel.bickert@hsr.ca.gov is her email address. So she would be a great point of contact, and of course, she'll make sure that the appropriate staff on our team help answer the relevant question.
Very good. Well, Boris, thank you so much for joining us and answering questions about high-speed rail. We look forward to having more conversations with you as we go forward.
Well, I appreciate you hosting the summit and letting us join in this year. Great talking with you, and look forward to continuing collaboration and discussions.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Thanks.